This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
I am Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell this week?
What the hell is going on is we're talking about how net zero is economic suicide, and a case study of Britain, which has pursued net zero to the point that they have so dramatically raised electricity prices for their citizens and decimated their GDP in the process that the British economy is in deep, deep trouble, and it's largely due to these radical climate policies.
It is absolutely inexplicable. First of all, Robert Bryce is our guest today. He's been on before, and he will explain the mechanics of this sort of economic suicide. But it's funny, actually, I had a terrible Wi-Fi connection, and so we didn't get to have the conversation that Robert and I had before you joined, Mark, which was just about the religious fanaticism that is climate change, right? Look, I think there's not one of us who does not want cleaner energy. There's not one of us who does not want to live in smoggy towns. Everybody believes in the beauty of gardens, of all of these things are hugely important. And yet one can have this discussion without talking about destroying the economy in ways that are so detrimental. I said to Robert that this. I said even the Pope has adapted attitudes and changed in order to maintain the unity of the Catholic Church. And he said, well, it took 500 years for the Church to adapt. And for me, this is the climate change movement is like that. It is a fanatical religious movement where the facts are absolutely immaterial.
Well, as a traditional Catholic, if you're holding up Pope Francis as a model of how we ought to fix our climate discussion, I'm going to respectfully dissent. But you're right. It's not just a religion, it's a cult.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, I disagree with you a little bit because I don't think you can actually have a rational discussion about reducing, this clean energy discussion because it's not rational, the effort. And I agree with you. I don't want smog, but carbon isn't smog. Carbon is actually what trees use to grow. It's actually, the more carbon we produce, the more forests we have, the more food we produce. I'm not down with the whole climate cult. And look, if we could reduce carbon emissions without destroying our economies, then maybe that might be worth it. But
that is what we've been doing, Mark. Just hang on one sec.
Do that. Nobody wants to do that.
Hang on one sec. We have been doing that. That's what's so offensive about this whole cult.
But through fracking.
I think you're totally right. If you look at the emissions rates, if you look at American environmental changes, if you look at what has happened without these fanatics, just through modernization, innovation, tech, ingenuity, if you look at those changes, those are transformative. And they have made prosperity accessible, and they have lifted people out of poverty. The problem with the climate movement is that it doesn't care about people in poverty. What it wants to do is reverse our prosperity. And this is where Robert really, I think, gives us this case study about the national economic suicide of the UK. He talks about the fact that, people have gone from energy bills that were a few £100 a month, which, is like $500, right? More than mine, I should add, right now, and I have a pretty big house, right? Have gone from that to thousands, where people can't afford it, where the government has to subsidize during a cold winter the elderly because they are freezing in their homes because they can't afford to turn it on. He gives us the example of people who no longer shower at home because it's too expensive for them to heat the water. I mean, what the hell are the Brits doing? It's insane.
It's insanity, but also going back to what you said at the start, most of yes, the US is reducing its carbon emissions. Most of that is not because of wind and solar or green energy or anything like that. It's from fracking. It's from the fracking revolution because LNG is low carbon and the climate activists want to stop fracking. The great innovation that has turned America from an energy importer to an energy superpower was the fracking revolution, and they don't want to do that. If you go back and look at the 20th century, what won the Cold War was America's emergence as a nuclear superpower. And what was the left's reaction? They wanted nuclear disarmament. Well, we're now in a new Cold War with China. We're in an AI arms race with China. Where the world is going to be defined by who wins the AI arms race, which requires massive amounts of energy, and we have it in abundance under our feet, through fracking, in our seas, everywhere. All we have to do is tap into it. It's our superpower, is our access to hydrocarbons and ability to process them and have low cost energy. And what does the left want to do? They want energy disarmament. It's the same impulse. Whatever makes America stronger and more competitive in the Cold War with our adversaries, they want to get rid of. We should be drilling, fracking, and doing everything we can. And oh, by the way, the left can't seem to get past its hatred of nuclear power, which is green energy. The reason we won the Cold War, in addition to nuclear power, was that we understood that the way to grow an economy was not to have 5-year plans designed by a Politburo in the Kremlin, right? And it seems like our energy policy is being on the left is being designed by a Politburo in the Kremlin. Okay, we're going to choose the technology, we're going to force Americans to use it, we're going to subsidize what we like, and we're going to try and destroy what the market wants, and force everybody into this new direction, which is going to have all sorts of unintended consequences that will bring down our economy the way the 5-year plans brought down the Soviet economy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to talk about two things here, and then I want to turn to our amazing guest. But I don't think that everybody who is, interested in the environment is a nefarious, evil enemy of all that is good in capitalism. But I do think that they are indifferent to the outcome. In other words, this is the God, right? This is what we've talked about. It doesn't matter. It's a little bit like the Spanish Inquisition. We've got to get to purity. I don't care how many people we kill along the way.
You
If you
never
talk
expect the
about
Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. We should always have a Monty Python reference, and we should force people to have we should have a contest so people can guess what it is in each episode. I'm going to try and put that together. But back to the serious part. Look, UK has the most
Back to your
expensive
theory, which is yours.
and another one. The UK has the most expensive electricity in the OECD. Okay, who does that affect? Does that affect people like us who can afford a marginal increase, or does it affect people who live on their salary, who are poor and who are scraping? And if these people want to argue that they are advocates for a better world, you cannot argue that you are an advocate for a better world and ignore the plight of the poor, especially in the freaking on the continent of Europe, in the United States. The second point I want to make, which we dive into a little bit with our guest, but I think is hugely important, is that we don't really talk about the geostrategic consequences. You rightly made a really good point about China in our discussion that I think people need to listen to. But I also want people to think about, we talk about the UK, let's just talk for a second about Germany, right? Insane. The Greens wanted to shutter the nuclear plants. Angela Merkel, who I have turned on like a viper over the years, I used to like her, but shuttered the remaining German nuclear plants and left them mercy to who? Vladimir Putin. And then our guest tells us that, in fact, so much of the anti fracking, anti nuclear, anti everything, the pro wind, pro solar movement is being financed by the like of Gazprom. And then you have to ask yourself, who does Greta Thunberg, Hamas lover, incidentally, work for? And the answer is, maybe she's working for Vladimir Putin as well.
No, it's exactly right. I am perfectly fine with electric cars, right? If you want an electric car as your daily commuting car and all the rest of it, that's perfectly fine. Except the problem is, I've got to subsidize your electric car. No, the
Yes.
electric
Yes,
car
Elon.
industry cannot survive as a free enterprise in a free enterprise system without government subsidies. I'm subsidizing the car. I'm subsidizing building your charging stations. I'm paying for all of that. And you are a niche market that the vast majority of Americans don't want these cars. I remember a couple of years ago, I flew into Logan Airport. And I showed up like out of a Seinfeld episode, and I had a reservation for a car, but they didn't have a car for me. Right? They were sold out of the cars, and it was going to be a few hours before they got the cars back in and turned them around. And so everybody was sitting there waiting. There was a whole line of us waiting for our cars that were not there. And I looked outside, and there were cars lined up. And I said to them, "What about those cars?" And they said, "Oh, those are EVs. Nobody wants them."
It's
So we were
amazing.
literally, you had dozens and dozens of people sitting in the car in the Logan Airport rental center who could have driven off in an instant in an electric car, but were willing to wait 3 or 4 hours in order to get a fossil fuel powered car. And I was just at Portland Airport to get
Oh
picking up
my
my
God.
fossil fuel car in Portland, Maine, and they had a sign, EVs, $15 a day,
How
because
much was your regular car?
it was probably 60.
If not more. That's right. You cannot give away these cars.
If you do rent it, they'll give you a deal if you buy it off of them. They're trying to get
I'll
rid
bet.
of these cars because nobody wants them. And what's happening is the organized left is going to make us all get in them and drive them, because what they're going to do is they're forcing all the car companies to stop making. If you look at all the cool cars coming out now, like the VW, they brought back the minivan, the cool minivan they had in the 60s, it's electric. They're going to keep coming out. Every cool car is going to be electric, and you're going to be stuck driving some fossil fuel powered sedan because that's all that's available. They're going to force us into this, like cooking a frog. You don't throw it in a pot of hot water. You just slowly turn up the temperature, and eventually we'll all be driving the EVs. And then the grid will
Like
fall
frogs.
apart, and China will beat us in the AI arms race, and we'll all be screwed. That's my theory,
Mark.
which is mine.
Mark, the apocalypse is coming. All right, it's time to turn to our.
And
somewhat
then the
less-
zombies will arrive.
All right, so we're going to talk about that part afterwards. Robert Bryce, he's been with us before. We love him. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a film producer. He's been writing about energy and power and politics and innovation for more than 3 decades. He's the author of 6 books on this subject. His most recent is A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. He's also the executive producer of the documentary Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. And he writes, and this is really what we talk about a great deal during the podcast, he writes on his super duper Substack, robertbryce.substack.com.
Here's our interview. Robert, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks, y'all. Happy to be back with you. It's been a while. I don't know. I don't remember when we were on last, but glad to be with you.
Well, we're glad to have you back. And of course, you wrote a fantastic piece on Substack that caused us to call you up and have you back on about how Britain is committing national economic suicide with its push for net zero. Tell us about that. But, this seems like a cautionary tale for us, because it seems like the left would love nothing better than to impose all the same policies that are killing Britain's economy, Britain's GDP, Britain's productivity on us. But tell us what Britain is doing and why we shouldn't emulate this.
Well, they're cutting their own throat, Mark. I mean, it's just very simple. Who would have think the Brits and the Germans would be on the exact same page, and yet they are. They have been. Now, the Germans may be riding the ship, right? They've just had new elections, and they're talking about turning their nuclear reactors back on, which is a good indication. But I was in London for 10 days last month, and my attitude when I travel is ask a cabbie, right? What are the taxi drivers thinking? And so, and of course I interviewed shopkeepers. I'm not bashful, right? I'm a reporter. I ask lots of people lots of questions, but the sentiment in Britain, everyone that I asked, whether it was the cabbies, the shopkeepers, the restaurateurs, what's changed in your energy bills? And all of them said they doubled in the last 4 years. Doubled. Now, one barkeep at a pub that we went to the night before I left, I asked her, well, what about this? And she said, oh, yeah, it's so expensive now. She said, we don't shower at home. She said, we take our showers at the gym because it's so expensive to heat water at home. Okay, so
Wow.
That's the kind of anecdotal stuff. But look at what has happened just since last September. The last blast furnace in Britain, in Port Talbot in Wales, closed. One of the homes of the Industrial Revolution now cannot make virgin steel from iron, limestone, and coke. Britain cannot make steel anymore. They have to use recycled scrap. Then just in January, the Grangemouth synthetic ethanol plant in Scotland closed. This is all a reflection of their terrible energy policy. And I'll stop after this, but what's stunning here is that the Tories and Labour are doing the exact same things. Remember, Liz Truss got in a few years ago and said, we're going to repeal the ban on fracking. Then Rishi Sunak gets in. He's another Tory, and he says, oh no, we're going to continue to ban fracking. So they have gas, they have shale gas, they have oil and gas in the North Sea. They won't drill for it, they won't frack. So, I hope they like it in the ditch. They're going to be there for a long time.
So, Robert, by the way, great to have you back. And this is a great piece, and you're doing really incredible work. I will only note that Mark and I have talked for years now about the problem of what used to be called the right in Europe drifting to basically being the equivalent of the American Democratic Party, which itself is obviously drifting left. And it's left this giant gap between the very far right and the center, which is growing ever deeper. And this is sort of evidence of that. What I wanted to ask you is an even more basic question. Explain the mechanics of what's happened here. In other words, how has the UK gone from being a pretty energy rich country with certainly available resources? When we think of the old school UK, we think of coal seams, we think of the North Sea. We think of a place that
Bringing coals to Newcastle.
Exactly. Right. We think of Newcastle. So explain the trajectory. How does a country do this to itself?
Gosh, it's truly incredible. I mentioned cabbies before. We took a taxi from our hotel to the British Museum, and I asked the cabbie, and he went off. I mean, he was so pissed. But he said it's the uniparty, and I think that's what this is about in Britain and Germany as well. Now, we've had a reset here in the U.S., but the Tories and Labour in Britain have both embraced this idea of net zero, and the government is still pushing this idea of net zero. It's truly incredible. They have a department, the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which is this is a British government agency. The Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. You talk about an oxymoron. That's like jumbo shrimp or family vacation or military intelligence. I mean, it's like you're going to do energy security and net zero. No, you can't. That doesn't work. Yeah. But this is the way that it's the elites, and I see it very clearly, and it's a class issue. It's the wealthy elites, and I don't like to use that word very often, but it's the case, imposing these massive costs on the poor and the middle class, and it's going to be ruinous for Britain.
Talk to us a little bit about the resources they have, because in your article you say that their gas fields could generate 180 billion British pounds and yet they have those resources under their ground and also in the North Sea, and yet they're importing natural gas. And also, how does that make you net zero if you import the natural gas versus developing it on your own?
It's all just incredible. I mean, it truly is. A little bit of backstory. During World War II, one of the great stories of World War II is that there were a bunch of roughnecks and drillers from Ardmore, Oklahoma, went to Britain and secretly drilled over 100 oil wells in Sherwood Forest. Britain's oil production went from 0 to 3,000 barrels a day. It was critical to the war effort at that time. So Britain has resources, as you say, in the North Sea, but they're not granting permits to drill. But just last month, Deloitte released a report on the Gainsborough Trough. So this is in Lincolnshire. And this is a shale gas resource, and the quality of the shale is as good as anything here in the U.S. The gas that is there, the recoverable resource is 16 trillion cubic feet. That's what is known. And it certainly, once they start drilling, they will find more. But this is an enormous onshore resource. 180 billion is potentially in GDP for Britain. And yet what happened as soon as they announced it to the Labour government, I'll quote, they said, the Labour government spokesman said, we intend to ban fracking for good and make Britain a clean energy superpower to protect current and future generations. The biggest risk to energy security is staying dependent on fossil fuels. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. 20 years ago, Britain was self-sufficient in gas. Now they're a huge importer. And in fact, nearly a fifth, get this, nearly a fifth of the gas that is now consumed in Britain comes from the United States in the form of LNG.
So let's talk about their plans from their perspective.
Sure.
Okay, in a beautiful, magical world of fairy dust and eternal sunshine, last I checked, but none of which were available in the UK. But let's
Which you need
pretend.
for solar. Which you need for solar.
Yes. In that beautiful world, if we achieved net zero, the pathway to get there would be how many solar fields, how much wind energy, how does this magical fantasy that these actual politicians who some people seem to actually vote for, a majority in the UK, how do they see this working? What's their argument?
Well, that's it, Danielle, is that they don't, the numbers and the math and the physics just don't work. The late David J.C. McKay, who was a professor at Oxford, he published a book, what was it called? Energy Policy Without the Hot Air, I think I'm remembering now, but he's dead now 10 years or so. He did the calculations, and to use solely wind and solar in Britain would require more land area than Britain has. I mean, it just can't be done. It's impossible. And I wrote a piece that I published on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com, this morning about batteries. And this is the other part of it that is the fiction that, oh, we can use batteries because, you know, we'll have batteries and we'll charge them with solar and wind and then we'll use them in the winter. No, wrong. And where is the biggest backlash against solar and batteries happening on the planet? And I document it in the new Global Battery Rejection Database. It's in Britain. There have been 8 solar projects that have been rejected in Britain just since January 1st. So it can't be done. It won't be done. It's all fantasy. I can't explain to you, Danielle, how crazy all of this is, but, you know, you can't fight stupid. I think you mentioned cautionary tale here, and this is a cautionary tale. And while I certainly don't agree with everything Trump is doing, he has clearly reset the energy agenda, and that has been much needed because the Biden administration was sending us down a very bad path. And now there's been a course correction in the U.S. There might be a course correction in Germany. I don't see any course correction happening in California, which is using this same kind of delusion or is chasing this same delusion of net zero, completely decarbonizing their electric grid. It can't be done. It won't be done. But the problem is that the damage and the cost to consumers could be enormous by just pursuing this foolish policy, whether it's, banning the use of internal combustion engine vehicles, which is in the case in California, or trying to completely decarbonize the electric grid, close all the nuclear plants. It's just flat crazy. It's total bonkers crazy town.
Doug Bergam talks about this, that in Germany, they've been victims of a Russian psyop. Right.
Yeah.
The Russians convinced them to get hooked on their natural gas, and they fund the Green Party, which then convinces them to give up fossil fuels and to give up nuclear power and to go for this green energy stuff. And the result is they have a quarter less electricity and at 3 times the cost. Right. I mean, is this being felt throughout? Is how much is Russia to blame for what's going on throughout Europe with this net zero?
Well, there's no doubt this is part of it. And I will just say one thing. I heard you say green energy. I don't call it green. I don't call it clean. I don't call it renewable. It's alternative energy.
Okay.
It's alt energy.
Okay.
And I think it's important to use the right terms here because these are marketing terms, clean, green, renewable. These are marketing terms that the left and the money class have used to promote this agenda. I also don't call them fossil fuels. I call them hydrocarbons. And I think that's a more correct term. Just my thoughts on that. But there's no doubt, and Matt Ridley has written about it. I've written about it. The money has been traced that Gazprom and the Russians were funding a lot of the anti-fracking groups in Europe, and so you still have now in Europe, I think, 8 countries that have bans on hydraulic fracturing, and it's clear there was a Russian connection here. And of course, I mean, Putin he's say what you will. He knows what he's doing. He's a strategic thinker, and he made sure that he got as much of the European economy dependent on cheap Russian gas as he can. But I think just one other quick point here. What's critical, though, if I'm a homer, I'm all about the United States. I'm all about bullish on the U.S. we now have a price advantage over Europe and Asia of about 3 times. Our natural gas is 1/3 of the cost of the gas that is now being used in Europe. It's the same in the LNG that's going into the Asian market. So while the rest of the world, many of the countries in the rest of the world want to commit economic suicide, this is going to help the U.S. Where is INEOS going to locate their new facilities? Where are the Germans moving their petrochemical plants? A lot of them are coming to the United States and the U.S. Gulf Coast. But I think one of the other things here, Mark, we've talked about the solar, we've talked about wind, the land use issues, and then the piece that I just published this morning, the global battery rejection database, is the other part of this, because all of these alt energy schemes depend on the ability to store massive amounts of electricity. And electricity is incredibly difficult. It's expensive to store. And so we saw in January with the Vistra's plant at Moss Landing in California, a huge fire. And then it was raged for 5 days. A month later, it reignited. So we're seeing these battery plants. They're in fact very dangerous. And I have tabulated in the database 52 examples, 52 communities around the world, from Australia to California to India to Lithuania, have rejected these battery storage projects because they don't want them in their neighborhoods, because they realize the danger of fire, land use issues, land use conflicts, property values, all these things that are very similar to the backlash that we've seen against solar and wind. And now it's really affecting the battery business.
But I don't understand. I don't understand if there's a huge battery rejection and batteries are the critical link to moving towards electric cars. And in fact, all we hear about the brave new world of the future is that it's going to be amazing battery storage. Help me understand how this works.
Well, again, it doesn't. And what we're seeing already with the adoption levels of electric vehicles in the US and in Europe. Now, this isn't just the consumer preference. That's certainly part of it. But it's that now we have higher interest rates. The economy is, uncertain. People are stepping back. They're not buying as many new cars. The other part of this is that it's funny, isn't it, that Trump is now touting Teslas. Republicans don't drive electric vehicles. Generally, it's Democrats. By and large, who drives electric vehicles? It's Democrats wealthy Democrats who live in California, right, in certain number of zip codes. But it's generally across the country the same. And now because Musk is in trouble, now suddenly they're saying, oh, Republicans should drive EVs too. Well, fine. But the reality is electric vehicles, the history of the electric vehicle, I've written about it for years. It's a century of failure, tailgating failure. Edison knew the electric car. Henry Ford knew the electric car. Why hasn't it prospered over 100 years in the marketplace? Because batteries still stink. And they have this nasty habit of catching fire, as we saw in Moss Landing, and we're seeing all around the world. And of course, electric vehicles spontaneously combusting. It's, these technologies, they're not perfected.
Fire departments can't put them out. When an electric car catches fire, the recommendation is just to let it burn.
Stand back. Get out the marshmallows and let her burn.
The other problem is, of course, is that there are electric cars and there are even electric SUVs. There aren't electric earth movers to get the rare earths, right? And there aren't even electric semis because they'd be too damn heavy and the damage to the roads. This is like we forgot about the Soviet Union and central planning. Right? That a bunch of geniuses in Washington decided we need to transition the world from the internal combustion engine, which is probably the greatest tool of lifting people out of poverty that has ever been invented. Let's get rid of that because of this climate, cult that has taken over the world, and move towards this technology that we will just, no one wants it, but we'll push it on them and we'll invest all these taxpayer dollars and we'll subsidize the hell out of it. And we still don't know how to make it commercially attractive.
It's right on point, Mark. And I've said it many times. I'll say it again. If oil didn't exist, we would have to invent it. It is a miraculous substance when it comes to ease of handling, energy density, cost, scale, all of these things that are the keys to our energy and power economies. Oil, why has oil persisted? Why do we use it and have used it for so long? Why? For 25 years has oil use in the United States not changed. It's been 19.8 million barrels a day since 2000. And why is it? It's not that we love oil. And the attitude on the left, we love the oil, but we hate Exxon. Okay, hate Exxon all you like, if that's what blows your skirt up. But the reality is that oil is irreplaceable. And these batteries and the problems with batteries is very fundamental. It's about basic physics. The energy density is too low. And when you try and increase the energy density in the batteries, they become more volatile. This is just basic chemistry. And I'm no expert chemist, but I've been looking at this for a long time. And that's simply the reality. And yet, what is happening now in the U.S., building solar and batteries? Why? Because the incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act are so gargantuan.
Has there ever been a country which has started on this net zero transition and seen its energy costs go down?
No, there isn't. And it's interesting. Bjorn Lomborg has done some great work on this, showing the correlation, the close correlation between electricity coming from renewables and electricity prices. Now, correlation doesn't prove causation. We all know that. But it's very clear when you look at California being the obvious example. In 2008, since 2008, when Arnold Schwarzenegger mandated that utilities in the state get at least 33% of their electricity from renewables, electricity rates in California have skyrocketed. In fact, they've gone up more in absolute terms and on percentage terms than any other state in the country. And now California has to get to 100% clean electricity by 2045. I mean, it's just a date with disaster. The reality is that renewables, yes, they have their virtues. I have 8.5 kilowatts of solar panels on the roof of my house here in Austin. But the reality is that people like me, we can have solar panels. That's a regressive tax on a lot of the rest of the people who are on the grid. So no, the short answer is renewables and alternative energy drives up prices. It doesn't drive them down. And that's a real problem.
So I keep coming back to the politics of this
Sure.
because it flummoxes me. I think when you talk about the panels on your house, which by the way are always an eyesore, at least in my neck of the woods, I think there's a price that people are willing to pay if they believe that they are saving the planet. What I don't understand is when that price becomes so exorbitant, why we are not seeing change. So yes, in the United States, you saw the Democratic Party has sort of lost its grip for a variety of reasons, and Donald Trump won the election. That's not what's happening in Europe. Okay, in Germany, the CDU and the CSU didn't win enough seats to actually not have a coalition with the left. In the UK, obviously, there's not much difference between the Tories and the left. But in California, in New York, in Massachusetts, in all of these places, you're not seeing that people are turning around and throwing these people who have been lying to them for years about the climate disaster, about we're all going to burn down, or worse yet, we're all going to have an ice age if you're old enough to remember that. Why is that not happening? I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, how long do we have today, Danielle? How long is that?
Right, I'm asking you impossible questions.
How long do we have to discuss this?
Questions. But you're not you're not laying things out that are sort of demonstrably false. You're not some sort of anti-global warming crusading lunatic, the Greta Thunberg of the right. You're just talking about data. You're talking about the prices that people pay at home. It seems to me that's when people revolt, when it goes from the theoretical BS to the fact that people are paying thousands more a year.
Yeah. Well, I think this is key, and the cost is the key. And this is where I think people ask me, well, how do you fight back against this? And I think you focus on affordability, right? This is the area where, in theory, the left and the right should agree. And cheap, abundant, reliable energy and power are key. But I will, follow up with that by saying, I had an acquaintance here in Austin, and it's been, some years since I talked to him for several reasons. But nevertheless, I remember we got into it one day and he said, oh, energy's too cheap. And he said it just that way. He was a Texas guy. Energy too cheap. And I thought, you don't know what you're talking about. That for the poor and the middle class, or I'll put it this way, expensive energy is the enemy of the poor. Expensive energy is the enemy of the poor. And so you have this elite class, and I will say, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm disgusted, right? But what the states that you named, California, Massachusetts, New York, these are all heavily Democratic states. Then where do they get their money? They get their money from a lot of the tech elites and to run their campaigns. And this is what the agenda that's being pushed. So they're following in that pathway. But I'm hopeful. I think that there is a sense, and I think this, the 2024 election is a clear wake-up call. Now, whether the Democrats understand how dangerous how perilous their position is and how anti-middle class their stance on energy is, maybe they'll recover. But, I'm very hopeful that things are going to get better. And I think the Trump administration, despite its many flaws and a lot of, own goals and the rest of it, they understand. Chris Wright, Doug Burgum, and Trump, I think on an intuitive level, understand we have to have cheap, abundant, reliable energy first and foremost. And I'm on that front, I could kiss Trump. I mean, otherwise, not so much.
But so you make the point that the expensive energy is the enemy of the poor. And
Yes.
You're right. It's also the enemy of the developing world. All these leftist elitists who love to lecture Republicans about how we don't care about the developing world and how we need to, how can you get rid of USAID, all the good work it does in Africa? What is the number one driver of development in Africa is cheap hydrocarbon fuel that's driving their economic growth. And you want to throttle their economic growth by forcing them to use solar panels and wind. It's not only, it's argue if you want to go down the path of their CRT systemic racism, it's racist to try and force we built our economies on cheap, abundant hydrocarbons.
Right.
And now we're turning around and saying they can't do the same. Where's the equity in that?
It's inexplicable. It's immoral. I just think it's immoral. And I was lucky to be in London. I spoke at the ARC conference, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship event last month. And my presentation was on this very issue of energy poverty. And energy realism is energy humanism. We have to be realists about what is happening. And I'll give you a quick fact. There are 3 million people a year, 3.1 million, according to the World Health Organization, every year who are dying because of indoor air pollution caused by low-quality cooking fuels. There are more people dying from that form of energy poverty, from air pollution, from energy poverty. More people are dying every year from that than are dying from AIDS, HIV, cholera, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And yet, it's a scandal what's happening. Absolute scandal what is happening. And yet we don't hear anything about it. And instead, the attitude of the Biden administration was, effectively let them eat solar panels. What did Biden do? He went to the League of Conservation Voters in Washington in 2023 to announce that the U.S. government agency had funded a solar panel project in Angola. This is like, again, let them eat solar panels. The tone deafness of the whole thing was just truly incredible.
You mentioned the work that Bjorn has done, and I think Roger Pielke is another one who has talked about AID's desire and previously John Kerry's desire to force Africa to do all the things that we didn't do in its development so that it can remain poor while we continue to prosper. So if you have to draw a pathway, if you have to redesign, not net zero, because that's just lying, but if you have to redesign a path forward to cleaner energy, if you have to design a path forward to honesty about costs, because I think what you say about this is absolutely true. Much more of this is about money and about the rapaciousness of certain parties than people want to admit. What do you think the path to the future looks like?
Well, that's a great question. I think there has to be some reform at the World Bank, and I think that the Trump administration could help in that regard as well. I wrote about this a while back. It was one of the points I made when in London was that it was in December on Twitter. Now think how tone deaf this is. The World Bank puts a note on Twitter that they've just released this report on Guinea-Bissau, a little country in Africa that is 2.1 million people. The per capita income is $1,000 per year, per capita GDP. And the World Bank issues a report on how Guinea-Bissau can cut its CO2 emissions. How stupid
racist.
is this?
It's racist.
I'll say it's racist. I'll say it's immoral. It's just total bonkers crazy town. It's barking mad. It's loony round the bend, to use some Britishisms. But it's indicative of how tone deaf these elites are when these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations at multilateral lenders about the imperative of energy poverty. And so just to give you a note and one other number. So 2.1 billion is the GDP of Guinea-Bissau. which I couldn't find on a map. I had to look it up. I didn't know where it was. The administrative budget of the World Bank, if memory serves here, is $3.5 billion. There are 10,000 people working at the World Bank. Their administrative budget is greater than the GDP of Guinea-Bissau, and yet they're putting out a report. Oh, those folks need to cut their CO2 emissions. I thought, man, you guys need to look in the mirror. I mean, 3.5 billion. I mean, first, so they can jet around, fly in fancy hotels, and pay their salaries. And I guess they have a lot of Cheez-Its in the snack room. I mean, whatever it is. But that budget, I mean, it's just the insanity of the whole thing. It really is just beyond measure.
The other thing that seems, going back to this theme of, the central planners in the Politburo, just designing our energy future, they're trying. We are going into a period of time where, because of crypto, because of AI, we're going to need massive, massive increases in the availability of energy. And so both our economic imperative, we're in an AI arms race with China, our national security imperative is we have to find a way to produce abundant supplies of cheap energy, as cheap
Right.
as it can possibly be. Like China's advantage is low-cost labor. Our advantage is low-cost energy.
Yeah.
And our abundant supplies that we have under the ground of, of what Trump calls black gold, right? Or, I don't know what you call gas, but it's also gold, liquid gold. And what the Democrats are doing are, at once, they want to throttle our ability to tap into the fossil fuels and to tap into that black gold to fuel that. And at the same time, dramatically increase our energy consumption by making everyone drive electric vehicles instead of gas-powered cars.
Sure.
If you sat down and came up with a stupider policy, I don't think you could. If you said, how can we restrain America's ability to win the AI arms race, to win this whole race? If we sat down and designed it, we couldn't do a worse job.
Well, fully agreed. A couple of quick points that just, as you're talking to toss them back to you is, this expansion of the grid and the expansion of AI is going to be constrained by the availability of electricians, transformers. What did the one woman, I was at Cira Week a couple of weeks ago now, she said it's transformers, labor, and fuel, right? That there's this idea that we're going to make this massive transition. It's going to be constrained in part because the electric grid in the U.S. is so big. Nevertheless, the points that you make are absolutely right. And what is AI going to run on? It's going to run on natural gas. I'm pro-nuclear, and there have been a lot of splashy announcements about data centers and Amazon, Microsoft, and nuclear and blah, 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 blah. But what is happening now? Look at the announcements recently. Just a couple of weeks ago, Williams, a Tulsa company, announced a $1.6 billion data center deal with an unnamed hyperscaler. It's clear that all of this is going to run on natural gas. So, kind of the broad theme about what's going to change the narrative. Well, the narrative is already being changed because suddenly big tech, which for years has said, oh, solar batteries, wind or solar, Bezos, blah, 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 net zero, blah, blah. Now they're saying, no, we need gas and we need a lot of it right now. And they're not being shy about it.
So, exit question for me, Robert. If we change the regulatory environment, and I won't even begin to start ranting about Congress, because, of course, for as long as we do this via executive order, what we look at is that every 4 years we have the possibility of simply changing it all back. So, it's drill, baby, drill. Oh, no, sorry, we want solar farm, baby, solar farm. And so you go back and forth. It's very hard to do a sustained and economical business in that sort of environment. I wish Congress would do its job. But if we could create a regulatory environment that was going to allow this, that was sort of a model for the rest of the world, it wouldn't necessarily be, okay, just go and do whatever you want, right? That's never been the approach. What does the government need to do? And I agree with you, by the way. I like Doug Burgum a lot. What do we need to do to really propel ourselves into the 21st century?
Well, again, how long do we have today? This is
Yeah, I know. I keep asking. I know I'm the 35,000 feet person because
Sure.
what you understand technically is 99% of the time confusing.
Sure. Well, let me make a quick point that with Alan Armstrong, the CEO of Williams. I've talked about Williams. Again, I'm from Tulsa. It's a hometown company. My nephew works there. He made a very interesting point at Cira Week, which was that their cost for their pipeline company, their cost to get a permit for a pipeline is equal to or greater than the cost of the steel for the pipe that goes in the ground. So
Wow.
think about that for a minute.
That's insane.
This permitting part of the process is so expensive and takes so long that they, effectively, is hamstringing the industry. So,
Is that federal environmental rules, Robert, or is that?
I think it's all of them, right? Because pipelines, they're going to be interstate, right? So they're going to have to deal with state regulations, federal regulations. So it's a thicket, right? So permitting reform is going to be part of this. There's no doubt about it. But I tend to see the complexities more than I see the solutions, right? And so I don't have the perfect answer, but I think permitting reform and expediting infrastructure in general is going to have to be part of this. But I would also just add that one of the issues that, and Mark, you asked about the grid, don't forget how complicated this is. You have 50 states, 50 public utility commissions. You have the regional transmission organizations, ERCOT, PJM, New York, ISO in New England. You've got Cal ISO, CAISO. And then you've got the 800 co-ops. You have 2,000 municipal electric utilities. You have 180 investor-owned utilities. It's an extraordinarily diffused system with extraordinarily diffused geographic interests and economic interests. So getting everyone to sing from the same hymnal is going to be difficult. And Danielle, as you said, if we change administrations every 4 years, that's going to be doubly problematic. But, right now, it looks like, JD has the inside lane for 2028 and the Democrats, they're in complete disarray. So, maybe we would have some consistent policy for 8 years in a row that could change the momentum with regard to some of this. But it's going to be difficult and it's going to take a long time.
It's funny. BP used to be known as British Petroleum, right? And
yes,
and they just changed it to BP, and now they want to be known as Beyond Petroleum.
Yeah, well,
right?
they're back to petroleum now, aren't they?
This is like back to
petroleum, right?
Speaking of the rational coming back, well, it's not just BP; it's Shell as well. You've seen, Chevron. Well, they're down. They're firing 20% of their workforce, something like that. But we're seeing these big multinational entities, the corporations, saying, "Yeah, we're not making money and by chasing all of this alternative energy stuff. We're going to go back to drilling for hydrocarbons because we know we can make money at it." And again, I think this is part of a very positive trend that we're seeing, not just here in the U.S., but internationally as well.
Well, we got to make hydrocarbons cool again, and you're doing the Lord's work and helping make that happen. So thank you, Robert, for coming and joining us again and for enlightening all of our listeners and us.
Yeah, we love your Substack, and we'll link to it in the podcast. You really are doing the Lord's work because you're making this accessible, and it's just fact-based. You're not, it's not ranting as much as I am ranting today. It's not ranting. It explains. Look,
don't ever discount the fun of a good rant. So no, but
that's
thank
what
you.
Our podcast
I work
should
hard.
Be called.
But I work hard at what I do. I'm very lucky to do what I do. It's my purpose and my passion. And, I care about this. And so, but I appreciate it. Glad to be back on with you. Did I mention robertbryce.substack.com?
I was just about to ask you to repeat it again.
Perfect. Everybody
good at branding and marketing. Excellent.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Thank you.
So, Danny, what do you think?
So when Robert was talking about his new project, which is this battery rejection database of how many localities are basically NIMBYing the idea of battery storage, battery plants, I couldn't help but remember a few years ago, you remember when those so-called hoverboards were the rage,
Yep.
right? And people kept burning their house down because they would leave them to charge in the garage or the living room. And then the airlines had to ban them because people were trying to put them in the cargo hold. This is the challenge. Battery innovation is really cool. Someone was talking to me at a conference I was at about actually somebody from a very prominent German auto manufacturer. Guess which one? Was talking to me about what he thought
Founded
was
by
the
Hitler?
future. Yeah. No, not that one. I'm really impressed that we've gotten not only several Monty Python references, but also a reference to Hitler.
Of course.
And the Pope in this podcast.
There's a joke really there. Well. Hitler, the Pope, and somebody are in an airplane.
Exactly. No, I know. Henry Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger, that's right.
Exactly. Anyway, I'm sorry that the people who don't listen all the way through are going to miss this excellent and erudite interchange.
Everybody listens all the way through, Danny.
Oh, I'm sorry. People, I apologize for that calumny. So what he said to me was that he thinks the future is actually a combustion engine battery combination. And I said, you mean a hybrid? And he said, no, it's a variation, but the combustion engine is actually separate and it doesn't work quite that way. But even that was an acceptance that electric vehicles are going nowhere. As you
Literally
know,
and figuratively.
well, but that's the problem, isn't it? I'm not, as you know, I'm not as big a fan of Elon Musk as you are. But the reality of the economic model of Tesla is that Tesla makes money not from selling cars, but from selling its clean air credits to Ford and GM and everybody else. They prosper on government regulatory rigging. And, we need to think about fixing all of this. And I hope, as I said in the podcast, I hope we're going to fix it in law. Because imagine to yourself that these battery things are just, what a nightmare.
Yeah, batteries are the new ethanol. It's the new government subsidized
Ooh, good
product,
line.
right?
Good
It's a new
line.
government subsidized product that, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for government deciding to get in and force this on us. First of all, why are wind and solar not commercially sustainable? Because there are no batteries that can hold wind and solar that are commercially available. The battery technology doesn't exist in order to make wind and solar. So if there's no sun and there's no wind, you don't have power. And that's not, you can't run an economy on that. There are no batteries that are capable of driving a semi-truck, because even if they made them, they'd be so heavy that literally we'd have problems with the roads. The roads would not be able. We don't have roads that are built for that kind of weight of vehicle. It's like, remember when Trump wanted to have the big military parade in Washington, and they said, well, you can't drive tanks down Pennsylvania Avenue because it'll break the roads. Same thing with electric semis. They literally, the roads can't handle electric semis running around, even if you could do them at an economic rate. When a bunch of people meet in the Politburo in the Kremlin and decide to rejigger the economy, there's so many unexpected, problems that occur that they're going to drive our economy off the cliff if they force us down this road. So if people want to go buy electric cars, fine, do it without my subsidies. Do you want to spend the true cost of a Tesla or a true cost of an electric car and without my subsidies, without me paying for all your charging stations, and you can convince enough of your neighbors to do that, go ahead, have at it. But I'm going to be driving the internal combustion engine until my internal combustion engine stops working because that's the way of the future. And our economy is going to pay it. We're going to be like Britain if we don't get off this electric road we're on.
Yes, we are. And I think that,
So many analogies in that.
yeah, she's there. You are completely correct.
Yeah.
But look, if we're going to do a favor to the American people, we are going to help to drive the left not only away from the insanity of DEI and the insanity of all of its crazy ideas on gender and everything else. We are going to help drive them away from these impracticalities because they hurt the very people who they pretend to represent. And I think that is one of the most important elements of this that I hope our listeners take away. I really enjoyed this. I think Robert's great. I hope you guys
Absolutely.
think so too. I hope you guys think so too. Definitely follow him. Definitely follow us. And let us know what you think.
Take care. See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.